It's a pleasure to introduce you. Yeah, okay. It's a pleasure to have here Pei-Shan from the University of Leuven, the same Center for Research and Development Monitoring, ECOM, as Professor Glenville before. Pei-Shan published several analyses on Scientometrics, in particular applying this method and tools to the case of philosophy, right? Actually, before starting and telling you the title of this talk, they told me that on Monday it was Pei-Shan's birthday, and so here now. So happy birthday from the conference. Thank you for being here. And the title of the talk is Duality Phenomena in Scholarly Communication, Exploring Isolation through Scientometric Analysis in the Field of Philosophy. Please,
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pei-Shan. I'm part of the research team at ECOM Leuven as KU Leuven as Wolfgang. It's my pleasure to give a talk in this workshop, and especially this is the best occasion for us to present our study because it's a combination of a phylometric method in the field of philosophy. So it's perfect. Thank you for organizing it. And my presentation today would serve as another piece of puzzle complementing Wolfgang's talk on interdisciplinarity to complete the picture or the concept of duality phenomena in scholarly communication. Additionally, it would also connect to Dan's talk after lunch break that based on our following study of the study I would report it in this presentation. So it's indeed a great opportunity for this workshop offered for us to integrate all different projects into one united session. So my content of the presentation in the beginning would go back shortly to Wolfgang's what he already introduced, the duality of isolation and interdisciplinarity. Then I will focus on the isolation in the field of philosophy, following, introducing the background and bibliometric approaches, following the structure Wolfgang already provided. Then we would go to those empirical results and do some interpretation and comparisons in the end. So just quickly go back to the duality phenomena in science. As Wolfgang already mentioned, there are different aspects of the STEM phenomena from different perspectives. And our talk will be focused on isolation versus interdisciplinarity. And you already got the main concept of interdisciplinarity. It integrates knowledge from different fields and blurs the borders between them. And for us, I have to explain firstly that the isolation here, we only focus on the isolation in philosophy. Of course, I will explain the reason why. And these are based on, the content or the research is based on related studies Stan and I already worked on, conducted and published. So we basically take the idea, Huygens and Dashkant, they adopted the concept of fun network analysis to describe those nodes with abnormally high clustering coefficient. So they call it isolation in philosophical paper, and this kind of concept was also discussed in several philosophical papers. And then we take the idea, and it can be also be perfectly the other side of interdisciplinarity compared to Wolfgang's talk or the other project running in ECOM for us. I mean, so in ECOM, we would run these two type of analysis at the same time, almost. And then why do we want to focus on the isolation in philosophy? I mean, for bibliometrician, we kind of know they have the publication patterns and behavior in this field is quite unique and kind of fit our imagination of isolation. And from the perspective of philosopher, there are already several worries known about those lakes of progress or disconnection from society. Like philosophers has been engaged in investigating many kind of big questions over 1,000 years, but so far it does not that come too close to some consensus for most of them. So the progress is not that improve or seen clearly, and also there are many topics are quite abstract and spatialized. They are kind of disconnected from society. We see some kind of debate or discussion running in philosophical literature. So we also quote some philosopher arguments that the field philosophers would mostly speak to or work with the small groups of philosophers working on those technicalities. So for us, the isolation we try to measure in this field is something very interesting for both of us. So that's why we look at this topic. And then our question would be whether these specialized research topics are isolated from the society, the big broadest one, or isolated within academia, or the narrowest one is within the field of philosophy. So for these three levels of questions, we conducted three studies to try to look at from different levels. So in the first one is the narrowest one within the philosophy. And then we go to the society. And then the third one is ongoing now, and what is also will be presented by Stan later. It's extending the second one to broader fields. It will not only focus in philosophy, but many other fields in humanities. Then we would go back to the first study. So I just make it easier to compare with Wolfgang's talk. Then I follow the main pillars of the bibliometric approaches here. So first of all, we have to do the conceptualization. We have to define isolation and choose the appropriate approach. Then define disciplines to choose the right granularity for our subject assignment. And then the last one is we have to design our indicators, but luckily we don't have to concern like counting schema or normalization that much because we are in one field. And then also the presentation, interpretation, so on. So as I mentioned, we took the definition from Higgins and Dashkant that basically, but I just present a picture here, what from one study Stan and I did before, but it's just quickly to show not nothing related to Higgins, but it just quickly to show there are quite some isolated nodes in the field. This is a subtopic of philosophy, which is law of nature. But the more important task here is, like Wolfgang showed, we have to choose what perspective we are going to look into and to identify or to measure the isolation. We basically use the same approaches from same perspective. So the organizational approach based on collaboration. And the other one is the cognitive approach based on information flows. The only difference, I will explain later, but the only difference is we look at citation and reference together. But in this interdisciplinary study, they only look at reference. So for the organization approach, we applied it, but I think in interdisciplinarity study, they didn't take it due to many challenges, what Wolfgang already mentioned. But luckily for our study, this is not that problematic because first of all, we have the sample size is one thing, but we also got benefit from the spatial publication behavior in the field of philosophy. For example, philosophical papers are typically single authored. So like in our data set, which I will explain it later, in our data set, there are 84% papers are single authored. So we don't have to do anything for them if we want to look at the application of those collaborative papers. So that let us have much, we could be feasible to manage it. And the second is we also don't have to define the addresses to fields or disciplinaries, like what Wolfgang project, what they have to do. For us, we only need to separate the address to philosophers, non-philosophers, and also the collaborations between one philosopher and one non-philosopher. So it's much easier to identify the address. So it's in the end, we only have to clean up less than 400 papers in our data set. So it's quite feasible for us, even without applying any language model. Then for the cognitive approach, reference is easier, but for us, we really want to also see the one backward-looking isolation, but also forward-looking isolation. So we really want to keep citation information in this study. So we look at two directions of isolation, reference and citations. Then we have to choose our suitable subject classification and a suitable granularity label. The schema, the Agon schema, actually what presented in Wolfgang's talk, actually is not that perfect for us because we have much smaller field and group, and so even the smallest category is still bigger than what we need. So we only look at we define the field of philosophy by three Web of Science subject category, which are ethics, history, and philosophy of science and philosophy. So this is our biggest domain, which is called philosophy in our study. And then we have to go further down inside philosophy. At this moment, we take the distinction by Fisher, who he separates the philosophy into three parts. The main part is called LEM, the philosophy of language, epistemology, mind, and metaphysics, which is also known as core philosophy. But apart from this core, he argues that there are also another two subfields should be considered, and which one is philosophy of science, the other one is value theory. And according to Fisher, these two are more engaged with other fields than philosophy. And actually, in his paper, his idea is that if we try to like do more in these two subfields, and you can turn the philosophy inside out and then make it not that isolated as now. This is what he want to invoke. And then we basically take this kind of structure of the field and also try to test what is his argument. So then, then this is, we already had the second level of classification is the three subcategory, three subfields of philosophy. But we have to go further down to even higher granularity. Then we have to go to field paper, philosophical database. In there, they have their own classification for topics, which is fits our need to find subtopic under subfields of philosophy. And then we follow the three subfields to choose in total 17 topics among the three subfields. And we also separate them into general topics or applied topics, because we would like to test if there's difference, even within POS and VTE, if there's difference, if the topic is more general or applied. So anyway, we have this data set, and of course they have to fit another criteria, what Wolfgang already mentioned, they have to match, be indexed in Web of Science, because we wanted the reference and citation data from Web of Science. So we actually replaced some topics to get better, to only focus on those who has more, have enough coverage in Web of Science. So in total, we got 2,369 papers among these three subfields. And then following the Fisher's idea that, or his argument that the LENM is the most isolated subfield in philosophy. And then we just would like to test if this is true. So the first hypothesis is we expected that POS is less isolated than LENM. And second, the VT is also expected to be less isolated than LENM. Then for doing so, we have to design our methodology. Then we look at the questions from two dimensions. So the first one is about the relatives and relevant subset of academic research. Simply saying we want to see it's the isolation within philosophy or outside philosophy. So the inside philosophy, we call inside philosophy between different topics, we call it the disciplinary isolation. And those isolation from other fields outside philosophy is called interdisciplinary isolation. And then second dimension is what I already mentioned. We want to look at backward-looking isolation and forward-looking isolation together. Then that means we would have two at least indicators to be decided. But in the end, actually, we still want to see relative value and absolute value. I mean, relative value is what we originally want to do. Want to know the share of the, for example, citations outside of this field or within philosophy, but outside of other topics. But we still have the interest to see the absolute number, which is the main reference number from outside of field or outside of the topic, or the main citation numbers of this. This is we discussed this for some time, but in the end we still keep this indicator in our structure of indicator. And apart from this 8 indicator, in the end, we have to look at the collaboration. So basically, we have another indicators within disciplinary isolation and interdisciplinary isolation to see how the philosophers of topic not collaborate with only philosophers, or how often they do not collaborate with non-philosophers. So we basically have 10 indicators in the end. Now we go to some empirical results. Just quickly show some simple graphs and you can easily show the analyzed data. First, we look at the relative isolation. It's the share of those citations and references from outside of the topic or outside of the field philosophy. And basically, no matter citations, the green bars, and black bars are reference, but they are basic in line with each other. So we can look them together. And no matter it's disciplinary isolation or interdisciplinary isolation, LEMM is the most isolated subfield than the other two. And especially the interdisciplinary isolation of LEMM is very, very high. That also shows those philosophers or those papers in LEMM do not refer or be cited from outside of philosophy. And from the absolute number of the mean reference number or mean citation numbers from the field or outside of the field, it is, the higher the value is, the less isolation degree it is. So like for interdisciplinary isolation, EOS has the highest value of the score, and means the lowest degree of isolation. But LEMM is still the most isolated subfield. But here, I think we should also consider one factor, that POS would actually get much more citations, or they cite references from natural science, and the field is quite, I mean, their citing behavior is much different than philosophy or humanity, so they can thus gain more citations than LEMM, which is only get citations or they cite reference inside the philosophy. So I think this is what we should consider, and that's also why we were discussing again and again, should we keep this indicator? But in the end, we still keep it and report some information through it. For the collaborative isolation, LEMM has very high percentage of they do not cooperate with non-philosophers. So in this graph, I think it's more clear that LEMM basically they are either single authored or they cooperated with other philosophers, but not non-philosophers, or also know those we call mixed collaboration. I mean, between philosophers and non-philosophers. But POS has much more, even from outside of philosophy field. And here we just quickly show the difference between general topic and applied topics in POS and VT. It's obvious that general topic in POS and VT, no matter in which subfield, they are quite much more similar to LEMM than applied topics. Then we go to the last result. This is for the top picture. Actually, this is what Wolfgang presented in his talk. I just illustrate the numbers into a picture. So either for variety or disparity, I think the structure of the distribution is not that different from the what we are used for the citation standard. But these three numbers were all reported by Wolfgang already. So it looks okay, but I mean, for our purpose is to see the difference between or within the philosophy. So I do it go it into the subfields for two indicators, and then again, it's clear that LEMM has much more skewed distribution than the other two, but it also means the homogeneity of LEMM for these two, no matter which one indicators, are much higher than the other two subfields. On the other hand, this is also supporting our result seen from the isolation. So again, it proves that isolation and interdisciplinarity, no matter which direction you look at or perspective you look in, and which methodology or approaches indicators you choose, but actually they are showing same thing because it's the same phenomena, and this is also what these two talks would like to present and to combine it as a package or one topic. Okay, then just short summary of the result of our study. The two hypotheses were confirmed, and the POS is much more it's a bit more isolated than LEMM compared to VT, and the general topics are more isolated than applied topics. So we back to the Kisha's argument. Our result basically supported his idea that decreasing of isolation of philosophical research could be turn philosophy inside out, and this is one way can be. I mean, the data support his argument, but the question is, do people in the field really want to do it? And because we also see other literature reporting that actually, for example, citations from outside the philosophy has not that high impact on the academic success of philosophers of science in the report, or the kind of publication outside the philosophy also not given be given equal weight. So from those literature we have seen, so there are still some I'm not sure how much the community would like to consider this as a solution to change the field of philosophy. Yeah, the general topic and the isolation, actually the main them is seen in LEMM and all other general topics in the other two subfields. So it's also possible that the intervention that focus on these dimensions of oscillation likely to have a larger impact, I mean, in this LEMM or the general topics in the other two subfields. But here I also want to also go back to the isolation, the relationship between isolation and interdisciplinarity. I mean, just go back to have a conclusion that, I mean, as I just mentioned in the last picture we have seen, they're actually measuring the same phenomenon. So it's interesting that we took two paths to go, but in the end, you still have the same kind of result in the end. Then just, this is not that important, but the limitation is there, like we only look at direct academic influence of isolation. We do ignore other kind of cooperation or opinion given or some other influence. And also this study is only focused on the domain of academic research. But for this is why we then go further to our second study to measure the isolation from society, and then even extending the scope to outside of philosophy. But for this part, I will leave them to Stan for his talk in the afternoon. Then basically, I finished my presentation.
Much. So there's time for the Q&A. Please.
Yeah, I don't have so much of a question as a comment. It's my lived experience. I mean, I don't know if Charles is the same as a philosopher of science, but I mean, I've had my career as a philosopher of science. I publish in Scientometrics and also sociology of science, and I mean that work is just something else, and it's there's no uptake in philosophy from that. So you really do sort of capture the culture of philosophy, and yeah, so well done.
Thank you. Also, thanks for the contribution of another philosopher.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Please.
So my comments / questions are actually concerning both your presentations, the presentation of Wolfgang and your own presentation. Where to start? Too many thoughts, very inspirational presentations. So I think the approach of duality, Wolfgang, you are kind of pursuing, and you're both executing you into examples, has actually a potential to give us insights in various forms of the nature of scientific work. Yeah. And I keep thinking of the Habilitationsschrift von Hubert Leitko, which I think has never ever translated into English, but I would still have a copy, I believe. Yeah. So who wrote about der Charakter der wissenschaftlichen Arbeit. So I think it might be interesting to look if there's any connections. This is more a thought jump. So you present the work under a more normative stance, because you start with Kitcher, and you also had on your slides saying it's almost as it would be bad to work in isolation. Yeah, while I think this is actually not the argument you wanted to make. The argument you wanted to make is that there are various forms, and Scientometrics can help us to identify those forms of work. The question what the function of those different types of working has for the overall academia, that's also an interesting one to ask if we can catch that by bibliometrics. On the other side, I think we all have doubts if this can be catched by looking at traces in the formal scientific communication, because we are also all familiar of the anecdotes of science history, how people have influenced each other, and never ever that appears in a citation. It appears in studentship, it appears of being at conferences, or maybe, because I also know that the group is a genius, and if there's a trace in bibliometrics. So I would like to hear your thoughts, how you could make a follow-up from the different types to the influence or the long-range traces, or do you think that's just not possible? What do you think? It's probably not just counting the citation of this group and comparing. That would not cut it, I think, but.
And they shortly say something, but I think we'll also, remind to Wolfgang's back. For us, of course, we already think many different approaches in the beginning, but of course, choosing the two approaches is basically because the practical reason that we are much more easier to get what we need, the data, what we need. And yeah, so that's why we only focus these two. But
no, we do not claim that we can really depict that bibliometrically and we can separate these things.
I know.
Absolutely impossible, and we cannot even trace it completely. But there are interesting work by Blaise Cronin, for instance, on co-authorship, on collaboration. And it's really so that we also find, because collaboration competition is one of the other phenomena we study, that there is kind of strategic collaboration, which is guided by competition, of course. But you cannot identify it as such, but you can shed some light on these aspects by using bibliometrics, as we tried here to look at certain aspects of relative isolation and on interdisciplinarity. So nothing is really unambiguous. So there's a wonderful article I'm still citing frequently by Bookstein. I think it was published in 97 or 98. He identified, and this is relevant for bibliometrics because we are quantifying and measuring. And he spoke about three dimensions to measurement and quantification. One is randomness, the second one is fuzziness, and the third one is ambiguity. And he said randomness is easy to cope with. We can use some mathematical and some stochastic models. Fuzziness is not so easy, and ambiguity is the most difficult thing. So it is so, and we are facing these phenomena every day. So it is our goal to draw the attention on these two sides when we analyze something. That nothing in world is unique, so that we always can say that is covering or that's depicting this one side. There's always another side. If we look at collaboration analysis, because we have so many studies on scientific collaboration and co-authorship in particular, because co-authorship is not covering collaboration, not all aspects, by far not all aspects. But then you see that there are different motivations for collaborating. This has also been wonderfully listed by Don Del Beaver. He has presented that once at the Cornet, and I asked him, please publish a paper on that. It's very important. That's a bit the equivalent to Garfield's motivation for citation, the motivation for why people are collaborating. So there are so many motivations for keeping kind of isolation, keeping the rest of the world apart. On the other hand, there's also many motivation for interdisciplinarity, yeah? And it's not possible for bibliometricians to trace all these aspects, yeah? Just to highlight some points of them. And
But I
this is
think
what we tried now.
I think by highlighting the duality, you do more justice to the complexity of the system
Yes.
than by focusing only on
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So thank you very much for this comment. It's very important.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So I was wondering, so it seems that one way to interpret the data, I guess, is just to say that, well, that LEMM has just a different methodological stance on how to do philosophy and what philosophy is, right? So the reason for the isolation is just a different methodological kind of way of proceeding, right? So I was wondering if you thought about these, and for example, I don't know, I thought it would be interesting to compare this data that you were showing us now with some maybe 30 years ago data or something like this, to see if there's some result coming from contingential reasons, right? I don't know, like maybe the field, the social forces that shape the field such, or if it's just a methodological kind of stance that causes this isolation, right? I don't know if you have any thoughts on these.
Thank you. We also actually discussed about, I mean, if we look from some periodic, some like historical or different periods to see the change of this kind of isolation labels. But in the end, we still focused on more current data.
Mhm.
And on the other hand, I think the base of the field is quite stable and long, and now it's not a highly changed new field or new trend. So that's why we were only focused on the latest data.
Mhm.
But yeah, we have sort of but there's also some practical reason, because the data in Web of Science for like 30 years ago, actually it's not that easy to have complete data to analyze. So that's also kind of the main reason we chose to keep focusing on the current.
Fair enough. Thank you.
So thank you very much. It was very interesting. I remember your paper on Scientometric actually. And I have also a kind of suggestion for future work. So you know that philosophy has many fields in the humanities, has also many national contexts. So the context of the different countries is different. Philosophy in Italy has a rather different structure from philosophy in the UK or philosophy in France. So it would be very interesting. Also, for instance, for us in Italy, that division into LEMM, philosophy of science and value theory doesn't really map on how philosophy is organized here. So if I can suggest something is to also try to get data from specific initial context and check whether the isolation rate is different in different countries. This could be interesting to see. Clearly, there is a problem of data gathering there because it's not everything covered by Web of Science or your papers. But thank you, it's very interesting. Just a suggestion.
And thank you very much for your suggestions for our further studies.
Other question? I have a little bit of follow-up on this. Yeah, I have a follow-up on this very point. The two questions, the last two questions, maybe they are somewhat related, as far as I can see, because if you start with Kitcher's picture, and you say that, LEMM, they are very central in philosophy, then you're taking a picture from, I think, top departments in the US or something like that. It is a picture that it is true there, as Eugenio was suggesting, but maybe not even in more peripheral departments in the US. At the same time, the top departments in the US, they are, of course, hegemonic in a sense. So this relates to the second question. Then if you have your data over time, right, you can see how this happens. I mean, you can measure the way in which this hegemony worked during time. I think it would be really great for us to see that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Great. So